Welcome. We are so pleased to have you here today. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the Executive Director of the SEEP Network. It is terrific to welcome our second panel on the Diaconate. This session, which has been curated by Tracy Middleton, is going to be terrific. We are so excited to have our panel with us. We are grateful for them taking the time out to join us today. Please do feel free to enter your questions and comments into the chat feature. And again, thanks for joining us. I'm going to hand it off to Tracy and look forward to this great conversation. Tracy.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to the SEEP Network for offering this platform for dialogue on the ministry of deacons. So I'm Tracy Middleton. I'm the president of the Association for Episcopal Diocons, and AED seeks to empower all the baptized for diaconal ministry. So we advocate for and we lift up deacons. And we also encourage the members of all four orders in the work of connecting the church and the world. So you can find us online at episcopaldeacons.org. So as I introduce our topic and our panelists, I would invite you to share in the chat where you're joining from and what order of ministry you represent. So this afternoon, AED is really delighted to collaborate with SEEP on the second of a three-part webinar series entitled Many Servants, Deacons Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. So the first webinar in the series looked at the history and theology of the diaconate. That was the yesterday part. Today is the today part. So we'll explore the challenges and opportunities facing deacons in the present. And then today we'll hear about innovative models of ministry in a parish that has a team of deacons. And we'll hear about the importance of developing resources for Spanish language deacon formation. We'll also hear about issues facing younger deacons and those in discernment for the diaconate. So the third part of the webinar coming up in January, February, the future, we'll look at advancing the diaconate into the future. So I'll put a link in the chat where you can give me your email if you would like a reminder to register for that webinar when we have the date set. So many thanks again to the members of our panel. I'm so grateful to each of you for sharing more about your work. So if you would, please just wave when I mention your name. So Doug Fisher is Bishop of the Diocese of Western Massachusetts. Jack Essing is a deacon at All Saints in South Hadley and a member of AED's Young Deacon Committee. Sue von Rautenkranz is Archdeacon of the Diocese of Washington, and she serves at the National Cathedral. Yoimel Gonzalez is a priest and the Dean of Escuela Diaconos, also in the Diocese of Washington. Jared Houze is the Rector of St. Andrews Amarillo in the Diocese of Northwest Texas. And Courtney Jones is the Associate for Ministry Development at St. Andrews and one of 6 deacons in that parish. So Courtney, would you and Jared get us started? What is it like serving with a team of deacons?
Well, I feel like I could answer that question super quickly and say it's great. It's great serving with a team of deacons. I'm not sure everybody has that opportunity though. So I think I want to actually ask sort of like a prequel question to your question, which is how in the world do you end up with 6 deacons? And I believe that we may be the deacon capital of the United States of America with 6. There may be people who can tell me in the chat now, and I'll be watching for it if their particular parish has more. But I think there's a couple reasons that we have so many. And one is in this diocese, the geography is such that if you raise a deacon, they really aren't going to leave that parish because everything is so far apart from each other. Amarillo to the next large town is probably a 2-hour drive. There are some smaller parishes that we do serve, and we'll circle back to that in just a minute. But for the most part, if you were raised up as a deacon anywhere in this area geographically, say within the closest 50 miles, you're probably going to be a deacon at St. Andrews Amarillo. So that is just kind of a feature of our geography. This parish happens to be a very outward facing parish. It is a place where when I got here 10 years ago, one of the main questions you ever heard was, if it is your ministry, and then someone would present you with something that they thought that maybe you'd be gifted at doing. And so it's a it's a parish that's always looking out for how they can serve the community, which I think then produces service. I mean, it produces diaconia. So you're like naturally going to be raising deacons. And also when you have multiple deacons, you make more deacons because people can see a model of what it might look like. But they also see that it doesn't have to always be like a mold. You know, there's not just one type of deacon, there's many different types. So related to that, what we get out of having the 6 of us is the ability to kind of specialize in certain ministries. So back to that question, if it is your ministry, we have one deacon who does a ton of work with like hospice care and making sure that the Eucharist goes out to people who are homebound. And we have another deacon who does a lot of work with people who are, say, going through divorce because he is an attorney and works in family law. And then we have, you know, another deacon who just loves to work with the flower guild and loves to work on the grounds, and he's really able to dig into those things. So there's different ministries for different folks where they can really lead out in different directions and really dig into specializing, but also we get to collaborate. And so we have several rotas, like who is the deacon on duty? Is a frequent question around the office when we have someone coming to ask for something. Who is the deacon on duty who can help with this? So every 6th week, we pick up a week of being on call, as it were, for those calls, like perhaps somebody has been evicted and maybe needs some housing support. Then the deacon on duty would come in and help with that, help facilitate that issue. It also means that no one person really serves at the table week in, week out. There's a lot of switching around on that. We have a rector who's very generous with the pulpit, despite the fact that our bishop just referred to him in front of me the other day as the best preacher in our diocese. And maybe I shouldn't say that because there may be people watching. But anyway, he's very generous with the pulpit. And so you get the ability to hear different voices. And it's kind of a collaborative model in that way. So when you have many different types of servants, you get many different types of voices, whether that be in the pulpit or in formation or wherever throughout the church, leadership of different ministries and organizations. I'll let you talk now, I'm sorry.
Wow, well, one of the things of what it's like having 6 deacons is after a question, after hearing such a wonderful response, I don't feel like I have to respond at all. I can just kind of bow out of the conversation, but I won't. And I'm going to brag on Courtney for a little bit here. One, she just flew in from New Orleans. And so she booked it to make this call. And so I'm just totally impressed that she's with it.
I'm very tired.
One of the things I was drawn to this parish in the discernment was the amount of deacons that they had. There's a nickname for them when they're all together here. Like you have like a gaggle of geese and a herd of whatever. They're called the disturbance of deacons at St. Andrews when they're together. So that's kind of a fun thing. For me, as rector, what's it like to work with 6 deacons? For me, it's more of a question of leadership style and leadership model. And something that I'm very interested in continuing to explore is kind of a decentralization of leadership. Everybody has their own way of leading out. Everybody kind of has their own wheelhouse. And for me, something I identified kind of early on is that's the thing that really draws me to the idea of leadership and being a leader is decentralizing it, making it less top down, finding ways to create cultures of permission and not cultures of control. And with 6 deacons, that's a lot easier to do than it sounds. Not that there aren't challenges in that, but to be in a place and just as Courtney said, to see that there are so many different styles and different ways of being with people and ministering, I feel like a big part of my job is to kind of embody my inner Phil Jackson. I don't know if anybody are basketball fans. Anybody see that documentary, The Last Dance? I feel like I'm Phil Jackson in the mid-90s. Like I got Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan and all these folks on my team. Dennis Rodman, you could be the Dennis Rodman.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I feel like it's my job just to hand the ball to people. And to be a kind of support and when needed, a kind of presence that helps guide in discerning certain aspects of different ministries. But it's truly a gift just to witness what they get to do and how they do it. And so I feel like a big part of my role is to offer encouragement, offer some direction when needed, and then to get out of the way and to watch it. Because something that, part of that decentralization of leadership is that just doesn't include me, but includes all the deacons too. So, and to watch them decentralize themselves in their different ministries, to identify different people within the congregation in these various ministries that each one is leading out on. They're finding, different people in the parish and identifying gifts and bringing those people into different ministries. So it's a really beautiful thing to watch. And I think something, and Courtney kind of touched on it, something that I think having a culture that creates deacons is they watch them serve and it's a joyful service. Now, obviously, I don't have to tell anybody who's on this call, it's not always joyful. I get that, we all get that. But I think there's something about the kind of camaraderie and community that the deacons have within themselves, one another, that other people see that from the outside and see a true joy and authentic happiness in service. And they want to be a part of it somehow. Several weeks ago, all the deacons were at a certain parishioner's house who's been having a difficult time. And he's been transferred to a full care facility. And I think I called Courtney to check in on something, and I heard all this laughter in the background, and they were all over at this gentleman's house, just the deacons drinking beer and moving furniture. And I was like, nobody invited me, you know what I mean? But, and I'm glad they didn't. They don't need me around there. I mean, they have their own kind of special relationship and friendship, and they're colleagues one to another in a really neat way. And I think when other people see that in the parish, they want to be a part of it and they're curious about it.
Well, I wanted to follow up with a question that I saw in the chat that Ken had asked about how liturgical roles are divided since you have 6 deacons in one parish.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah,
one?
you go ahead.
I will say that when I was a brand new deacon, I was the 5th deacon at that time, and that meant that I only served at the table on Sunday, every 5th Sunday. And so I was always forgetting what to do and how to do it because, you don't have that repetitive practice like you might have if you were the only deacon at a parish. For the most part, we serve on both Sundays and Wednesdays. Now we've kind of added a deacon to the Wednesday Eucharist so that we have a few more options, but we rotate those based on availability. So I still serve at the table on Sunday morning, like every 6th Sunday, and then Wednesdays, like every 3rd. So it just, there's a whole complex rota. I love spreadsheets, love spreadsheets. And so that's my jam. And I just make sure everybody's scheduled a relatively equal amount of times.
So how many deacons would you have in one Eucharistic service?
That's a good question. Usually 1 or 2. If the bishop's there, we'll squeeze in as many as we can in different spots.
Excellent. Well, let me switch gears for a minute and turn the microphone over to Sue and Yoimel. Would you share with us a little bit of what you're doing with the Escuela Diaconos?
Thank you very much. I think I'm talking first. I'll just say that I'm Sue von Rautenkranz, and I serve as the Archdeacon in the diocese. And because a question came up just the other day on Facebook, yes, I am a deacon. I know in some dioceses that term is used otherwise, but I am a deacon and have been for almost 29 years now. And don't plan to do anything else after that. We're going to share a screen with you just because I feel like that's the best way to proceed. And while I do that, maybe Yoimel, you'll introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Yoimel Gonzalez Hernandez. I am a priest in the Diocese of Washington, and I serve as the Dean of the Latino Deacon School, which is something that we created in the diocese 3 years ago. We will talk more about it in our presentation.
So the Diocese of Washington is pretty new to the diaconate. When I moved here in 2012, there was one deacon serving in the diocese and he had come from somewhere else. So there was a pilot program under Bishop Chain that produced 3 deacons. Those were ordained a month after I moved here. And 6 months after I moved here, Bishop Marianne asked me to co-chair a task force to produce a statement on the diaconate, for a discernment process for the diaconate, a formation program for the diaconate, and a deployment process for deacons in the diocese. That task force worked on and off for over 4 years. But once we'd finished the first 2 tasks, we began discerning people. And then in the middle of our trying to discern people, we were also trying to set up a formation program, which we did. But one of the things we did differently in this diocese that I don't see in a lot of other dioceses is we created 2 formation processes. One is an academic program, which covers what we feel are necessary components for academic training. And then the other one is a deacon school that actually meets monthly for 18 months and follows up on those academic classes that they've taken and moves us forward into doing more practical training for those 18 months and incorporating what they learned from those academic things. I think that design helped us to create something that was easily added into when we started looking at different languages being used in our program. The other thing that's really important here in the Diocese of Washington is the diversity, and not just the diversity of our communities, but the diversity of our clergy. Over the years, the last couple of years, we have definitely raised up deacons from all the different diversity places in the diocese, with the one exception at the time that we were doing this was from our Latino congregations. And so Yoimel's going to share a little bit now, I think, about what our Latino communities are like here in Washington.
Yes, so at some point, some parishioners in our Latino congregations began to share their interest in also having access to the ordination process to become deacons. And of course, the diocese didn't have a program to form them. So that's how the Escuela Diaconos, or Latino Deacon School, began 3 years ago, trying to respond to the diversity of the Latino population that gathers to worship in our congregations. Mostly that community is very diverse, although the great majority of the Latino population in the area is from El Salvador. There are a lot of different backgrounds in the Latino congregations in our diocese. Congregations are have like a very different kind of attendance. We have smaller congregations, Latino congregations, and big ones from 30 to 300 ASA. Also, the organization of the congregations is very diverse. It is very common that the Latino congregations are like mixed in the sense that there is an Anglo or English-speaking congregation with their own programs, budgets, but also a smaller Latino congregation who shares the same building, but that model can be also more integrated as well in our diocese. We also have mostly first generation immigrants, mostly from a Roman Catholic background in Central America, and mostly women. So at some point, when we began thinking about the Latino Deacon School, we have to think about these specific people who were coming to us looking for a process to be ordained as deacon. And with every person or diocese that come to us looking for information about this model, what we ask them is, well, what is the Latino population you have in your own diocese, and how you can adapt what you are envisioning for that specific Latino population that is around you.
So one of the things, the whole process began with conversations between myself and our Latino missioner on staff with the bishop. Those conversations happened over multiple times. And then we started having multiple conversations with the Latino leadership in our parishes, both lay and ordained. I think we had 3 different evenings where we just spent time talking about what diaconal ministry is, what that looks like. It was not something that they were familiar with or had seen, because there are no deacons in their congregations. Even the English congregations that they serve with, that are there in the same building, so most of those don't have deacons either. So that was one of the difficulties at first. The other thing is we had to deal with structural realities. I serve, you know, in the diocese, but I am not, I don't speak any Spanish. Like, I have Sesame Street version of Spanish in me. And so as the person with oversight for formation, sorry, I went back a page, I need to go back. With oversight for this process, we needed to find somebody to partner with. And really, like, just Yoimel just kind of fell into our lap, to be honest. And we developed a relationship and started looking at how we were going to staff this position, because that was really important to us. Luckily, there was a parish literally right next door to the cathedral offices that was looking for a not full-time position necessarily, and they were willing to partner with us on this initiative. Somebody in the chat asked a question about the program, and I will say our English speaking program uses, we have a relationship with Church Divinity School of the Pacific in California, and with their call classes, and we contract with them for them to produce 6 classes a year for us when we have folks in that English formation process. Those classes are Hebrew scriptures, specifically the Pentateuch and the prophets, New Testament with an emphasis on the Gospels, church history, ethics, systematic theology. Is that it, Yoimel? Did I say all of them? I did, yeah, because Old Testament is 2 classes. So those classes are done in a year. Well, then our structural reality was, in order to do bilingual formation in our, as I described before, we have a deacon school that follows that year-long class process of academics into a practical training program. That, from the very beginning, our design in that program was to make this bilingual, which was a bit of a challenge. You know, obviously, we weren't used to operating in multiple languages. So that was, and I think anytime we deal with multiple language realities, we have to be prepared to do some things very differently than we've done them before. But what we did was we took the competencies that we had developed in our diocese, because we were developing our academic program before AED came out with their competencies. In hindsight, they almost were identical in many ways. But when it was time to develop our academic classes for Latino students or English, primarily Spanish-speaking students, it was important for us to do a number of things. One, make sure that these classes were being offered in a way that would be helpful to the students in the classes, because the reality is most of our English-speaking students have multiple degrees behind their name by the time they come to be deacons. Even some of our younger deacons have multiple degrees behind their names. Most of our Spanish-speaking students are 6th or 8th grade education or less. And so trying to make the competencies the same and the academic value the same was a big problem for us in the beginning. But that's what we did. And what Yoimel did was to take those competencies and to make that a part of what was going to be offered in those classes. And then the really difficult part of our process was gathering the resources and implementing the processes for this, for moving forward. And I'll let Yoimel talk a little bit about our struggles and difficulties.
Yeah, so the main challenges in this whole process was how to create something that the diocese didn't have and that we didn't find in any other diocese, which was a bilingual formation, multicultural cohorts of deacons information with language access, not only in materials but also in personnel. So that has been challenging, of course, and at this point we are in the process of developing that once a month deacon school, fully bilingual in multicultural cohorts, and we're creating resources while we are implementing. Another of the challenges was how to diversify our approach to spiritual formation, especially because we are having students that are coming from a Latino culture and background, and Latinos experience God and spirituality in a different way. So how we open another way to also receive what they're bringing because of their own spirituality, and not to reinforce or provide an only single way to think about spirituality in our formation. The third main challenge was specifically about resources. There is not much available in Spanish in our publishing house. It was challenging to look for resources that could be useful and that can match our identity as Episcopalians. So we had to translate many important books or articles. There is nothing available in Spanish about deacons in the Episcopal Church, except one book. So that has been one of the main challenges for us. And the other thing was how to create all the first year formation, academic formation, with 6 modules, the same Old Testament, New Testament, hermeneutics, about movements of spirituality and liberation in the Bible. That's how we call it, history of the church, systematic theology, and Christian ethics. How to provide, to create all those resources for online formation without an online LMS or learning management system. We had the first year of that training already, creating videos for that, and our students watching them at home, sending a link from YouTube, We are now transitioning into incorporating all those resources into an LMS that our diocese is also using for the Deacon, for the School of Leadership and Faith that brings formation not only for deacons, but for the whole diocese. So we are now transitioning into that platform that will be more efficient and more accessible, not only for our students, but also to offer it for the whole church.
So thank you so much. I know that this is a topic that a lot of dioceses are trying to, find strategies for. And I know there are some folks here from some different dioceses that have put some questions in the chat. And so one way that you may want to follow up on this, if you're listening and you're able to look in the chat, is the link that I posted with a Google form. If you put your name and your email address into that form, there's a checkbox that says, I would like more information about other. So for other, you can put, tell me more about the program in the Diocese of Washington, and we'll make sure to send your questions on to Yoimel and to Sue to follow up. So let me shift over now to Bishop Doug and to Jack. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you've found about issues facing younger deacons.
Yeah, we're happy to talk about that. And thank you for these other presentations. I really learned a lot in the last half hour. And it's a real privilege to be here with Jack. It goes without saying that she brings a lot of energy to our deacons, but she also brings profound wisdom. She really does. So it's great to have her here. So there's no particular strategy for attracting young people to the diaconate. It's more a culture. And the culture is one of holy curiosity. So when I was first here 9 years ago, I felt that sometimes people who were discerning diaconate or priesthood would say things like, I've done everything else in church. May as well do this. Like it's another step up. And as we all know, it's not a step up. It's a different part of the body of Christ, right? It's a different service that we do. And reflecting on the fact that Jesus in the four Gospels asks 307 questions. He is asked a question 183 times. And he only answers 3 of those questions directly. He usually answers with another question. So we developed this program that anybody who's discerning priesthood or diaconate, or just where they're called to be in their Christian life, we formed this program called Loving the Questions. And it's a really deep, intense program, goes on for half a year. They continue to meet throughout the pandemic. First couple of years, we'd get maybe 7 or 9 people into Loving the Questions. Last year, we had 28 people. This year, we have 25 people. And so it's a culture of a holy curiosity. And Jack experienced that.
Yeah, so I experienced Loving the Questions during my 2nd year as a Lawrence House Episcopal Service Corps intern. And it really was this holy curiosity, recognizing that each beloved child of God is called to service, called to mission. And what Tracy said at the beginning of we're all supposed to be living out this diaconia, Loving the Questions really got to the root of that and got to something of holy indifference, of letting go of our egos and really letting God and the Holy Spirit guide us into living out our values. And I think that was very appealing to me as a 21, 22-year-old. Not the contemporary music so much, but more so of how do I do this with a commitment to the values of justice, of the values of love, the values of equity. And I really love Loving the Questions of providing a space for us to do so intentionally, and not with the question of, are you called to ordination, yes or no, but what are you called to? And it's something that we talk about a lot within Lawrence House as well.
Sure, yeah, and through the years, numerous people have gone into Loving the Questions thinking they were going to do one thing, and they wound up in a completely different place because of that holy discernment, holy curiosity. Then the second way that we have a culture of curiosity is with Lawrence House. And Lawrence House is an Episcopal Service Corps place. It's in South Hadley. It's a commitment of 1 year where people come to live together, they share community together, and they also work in service fields, which again kind of raises up a diaconal way of thinking. And some go on for 1 or 2 years. Jack was a big part of that, and she was also the director of it for a couple of years.
Yeah, I'm still the associate director with Lawrence House. And what Courtney had said earlier about really providing a space of exposure kind of to deacons and to service really allows for further continuation of building up people called to service and continuing out that. And I think that, so Lawrence House is one of those iterations for the Diocese of Western Massachusetts, but I think also one is Province One School for Deacons. And I will say that I see a lot of you commenting and putting in the chat. And so it just warms my heart to know that this community really stretches out.
And then to continue our theme of a culture of curiosity, and curiosity about where we're called to serve and how. We just started actually during the pandemic, what we call the Young Adult Ministry Network. You know, in our diocese, we have 32 colleges. So there's a number of chaplains to colleges. There's also people engaged in all kinds of service work. And so we're defining young adult ministry as people who are between 18 and 40 and people who work with people between 18 and 40. There's a lot of prayer that goes into it, a lot of faith formation, a lot of study of different books. And it's a time in people's lives where they really trying to discern where God is leading them.
And I'm one of the members. I'm someone who helps kind of facilitate some of those groups and go on retreats with one another. And it really provides a space to talk about how do we build community together in a way that our differences as young adults, especially knowing that 18 to 40 host a whole lot of life experiences, and what are the gifts that we provide to the church, and what are we calling the church to do together. And I think that this diocese has been really welcoming and encouraging to those questions and open to that transformation that young adults bring. So thank you.
Yes, it's a wonderful program, and it goes to that culture of holy questioning. And it's great to define the group so broadly, 18 to 40. So it's not just 18-year-old freshmen talking to one another. It's 18 to 40. It's people who have all kinds of different life experiences. So thank you for listening.
Thank you all both for talking more about that. I mean, I think it's something that's really close to my heart. It's been, to try and find ways to identify and then, remove barriers to younger people exploring a vocation in the diaconate, because I feel like, there is such an interest among younger people for social justice and for all kinds of things that are out in the world, and to make it more accessible for people to do work out in the world through the church, I think is just really going to end up helping everyone. So I'm so grateful for the work of the Young Deacons Committee. Courtney is also involved with that, and they're really doing a lot of great things too. So another resource that may be helpful is AED has 3 Facebook groups. One of them is for young deacons. You don't have to be young to join it. And then one is just the general AED Facebook group. And then there's also one for archdeacons and directors of deacon formation. And so if any of these kind of subcategories are helpful for you to explore, feel free to join those groups. I think you'll find a lot of great discussion on there and resources and support and networking opportunities. If you're having trouble using the link that I put in, I will also just put my email address into the chat. And if you want to follow up on any of these topics and be connected more to any of these resources, just send me an email, and I'm going to try to type it while I'm talking, which is difficult. Okay, there we go. So I know that that there has been a lot of activity in the chat, and I think it's great that everybody's so engaged with all of this information. So some of the questions I know had to do with related to, exploring programs for people who are undocumented, discernment for people who are migrants or itinerant peoples, folks who move around a lot. I mean, young people also move around a lot, but this can be one of the barriers to a lot of our processes of discernment. Kind of seem to require people to stay in one place for several years at a time. And so I wonder if anyone has thoughts about exploring ways that discernment may make it possible for people to discern who have a more mobile kind of requirement to their lifestyle. Yeah, just solve that for us here today,
Well, I will just say that, currently in the diocese, there's kind of an expected, that you're in a parish, that you're functioning in a parish, that you're being supported by a parish before you even enter discernment. So obviously, coming from some kind of, mobility where you're in one place at one time and another place at another time is different. Would be very interesting going through discernment that way. Now, I will say that we have had a deacon serving in our diocese who's from El Camino Real. Because of his government job, he was placed here for 2 years. So he was placed in a parish here when he was in the diocese, and he was working here probably 2 weeks out of the month for his job, and then back home with his family in California. And that worked out fine, but he had already been ordained in El Camino Real, and we just worked on a deployment process for him to serve. On the question about, we have not yet run into anybody entering the discernment process who has not already been here in some official status. So we haven't run into that either. We could very easily. We did find out during the pandemic that actually our West African and East African churches in the diocese, of which we have a significant number, actually have more undocumented folks in them than our Latino congregations do.
There was a question also in the chat about Lawrence House, related to how Lawrence House is funded. I don't know if you have that information.
Yeah, so I'm happy to touch a little bit on that. And I think it is kind of related to the question of what it means to lift people up who are transitional. I did not plan on staying in Massachusetts longer than the 10 months that I had signed on to do. And I still very much consider myself, even though I've been here for 5 years, as a transitional person, mostly because I keep taking AmeriCorps positions. And I think being transparent with myself about why that is, and transparent with the people I'm working with who have said, all right, and we'll see where the Holy Spirit leads us. But for now, let's work together. Let's continue to work together. And so I think it's related to that cultivation of community and trust in this diocese. And as for the funding of the Service Corps, Episcopal Service Corps sites are funded in a number of ways. And for Lawrence House, that is funded somewhat through the service sites themselves, paying for someone to work 35-ish hours a week, as well as the diocese offering support in a number of ways. And then Reverend Tanya Wallace, who provides much of her time and wisdom and laughter in doing so.
And the house is owned by the church. Lawrence House is right there next to the church, so there's no fees with that. So it's a deep community, and the money comes from different sources. The thing, if anybody's thinking about Episcopal Service Corps in a similar kind of style, in terms of budget, something you need to budget in is not everybody lasts the whole year, because again, they're young. And so if someone leaves their job that they have, that's paying into Lawrence House, that money disappears. So you have to figure out creative ways to have extra money, because again, dealing with young people, someone's going to drop out.
And there's a recognition that that's not a shameful thing. We've had trauma and tragedy happen that led to that, as well as just it's an intense experience. Yeah. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for sharing more about that. Courtney, there was a question that came up in the chat that you might speak to, which was, are deacons always non-stipendiary?
Thanks, Tracy. I figure you're calling on me because I work full-time at this parish as an associate for ministry development. So my answer would be no. Deacons are not always non-stipendiary. I don't know how many folks might be in the chat who are also stipendiary deacons. I'd love to hear that if there are some with us. I think it's the norm, and I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both ways of being a deacon, being a stipendiary deacon and being a non-stipendiary deacon. Occasionally it's suggested that deacons who are not stipendiary have more freedom to say things. That is something I get suggested to me a lot. I don't know if that's the case. And I'd like to push back on that. I'd like to think that all of us, when it comes time to speak prophetically, would be willing to speak prophetically regardless of that status. And I've met a lot of deacons, and I feel like when it's time, most of us will still speak. So I'm not sure that that is the best criticism of, or best pro/con to put on the list, but I think there really are pros and cons to both. If I were going to say that the con for me is when I was for 18 years a classroom teacher, I feel like I was a little bit closer to the problems of the world. And part of our role as deacons is to interpret to the church the needs of the world. And right now, I still see those things. I still try to pay attention to those things in my community. But as a classroom teacher, there was no escaping them. I mean, every single day you're going to see hundreds of kids and hear what's going on, and you're going to get a feel for, the things on the horizon that are happening. So I know the question wasn't what are the pros and cons, but I would say that so far has been a con for me. I do think there was another question in there, I think embedded in the same one, which was how younger deacons manage finances and insurance. And, I really think on the pro side, if you are working as a stipendiary deacon, that is a lot easier to do. I think it's really tough for younger people to feel like they have the freedom to explore the diaconate, because, it is this, it's almost like, and I joked about this once with our previous rector, it's almost like it's a very elaborate hobby. Like you have all of these things that you have to pay for and buy, and you wear these elaborate clothes, and no one is helping you buy those things. And then there's a lot of time involved, usually a minimum of 10 hours a week. And so, if you're looking at someone who is just getting started in another career, and also, starting a family, like they have all kinds of different time commitments that they're dealing with. And so I don't want to go all the way as to say we should be looking at more funding of insurance and stipends for deacons, but maybe I am saying we should be looking at more funding of insurance and stipends for deacons. And I know that is, especially on the East Coast, something that you all are bringing up in your diocesan conventions. And I'd like to hear more about that if there's someone who can speak to it. It's not me.
Well, first you talk about the insurance issue and I'll talk about the pension fund.
Yeah, wonderful. We had a very exciting diocesan convention this last Saturday is what I'll say. I had mentioned that I'm somewhat of a transitional person. And so one of my roles is as Lawrence House Pastoral Associate, and that is a funded position through the church. So in a way, I'm able to devote some of my time and money to that. And the church here has been very clear with me of how are you spending your time? Are you getting enough rest? Are you being able to slow down and be intentional about your calling as you're a young adult who's trying to figure things out? And so I think, and when I mentioned, I think that I have to say no to this, and this is why it's been received with grace. And I think because I straight up just have been poor for most of my life, I've gotten kind of comfortable at understanding these wiggle rooms and walk with my Lawrence House interns to do so. I don't think that's sustainable. And I think that there's a lot to be done and a lot of conversations and a lot of actions that dioceses have been taking, including ours.
Yeah, a step that we made, it's a small step, but it's a step this week. And I think Connecticut did the same thing, is that we have each of our parishes who has a deacon put $30 a month into the church pension fund. So it's not much money, $360 a year. And that gets our deacons into the pension fund, which they can then contribute money themselves. They have the webinars, all things about dealing with money. There's things that you know, in 50 years when you're up for retirement, you've got all kinds of different medical plans that you can access. So it's a small step, but it is a step towards some financial solvency in terms of that.
So I've posted a link in the chat to a page on AED's website that includes a webinar that CPG has put together about that program. So I think we're kind of getting close to wrapping up our time. Thank all of you for being here. But I'll go around once more for the 4 screens on here and see if there are last things that you would like to say before we conclude. Jared and Courtney?
Well, thank you for inviting us. We really appreciated the time to be able to learn from our colleagues, and I'm, kind of amped about this. I'm seeing a lot of chatter about the stipends, and I'm amped about looking into that. I think that's a really good step, however small.
Yes, thank you.
Yoimel, I know the school has raised a lot of interest, and so I will definitely be passing on to you some of the questions that have come up in the chat and trying to, help more people find out about your program and some of the challenges that you're working on finding solutions to. Is there anything that you would like to say to conclude?
No, the only thing is that as Sue, Archdeacon Sue said in the chat, we are always open to talk to anybody interested in knowing more. We have done that in the past, and we are happy to continue doing that and to share what we have been doing.
Thank you for that work. Sue?
So 2 things I would say. One, we are getting ready, as Yoimel had said, to put our academic formation for deacons who are primarily Spanish language folks into a learning platform so that it can be shared. And that is our intention, to share that widely, as well as the resources we've developed for that, because that was our intention from the beginning. The other thing that I think anytime you want to do, the simple answer to the question is, can we do Spanish language formation? And the answer is yes. And then you just have to have the willingness and the openness to do that. And that's all we did. So we just said yes and then figured it out from there. And it's not always easy, but we have fun doing it.
Yeah, I think the idea of saying yes to God is good, and that's a good place to start. So Jack and Doug? It's not the time to do the blessing and dismissal yet. Any last thoughts?
Right. I think that actually where Sue left us is kind of a good note for me. When you say yes, whether you're a young adult or whether you're working with young adults, you don't know what will come of it. And that's scary. And that's part of, I think, the transformation and resurrection story. So keep saying yes and being open to it.
Yeah, and I just have a question, just being curious, that there's a looming priest shortage in our diocese, not our diocese, in our whole country, because then it's easy to see why. The baby boomers are all retiring, and we were the biggest class of clergy. CPG, again, who knows all of our ages, says that in the next 6 years, 40% of all active Episcopal priests will retire. And so what's the diaconate going to look like in that space? Something I've considered, just have to get the right churches in line, but it could be that you have 5 churches and 2 priests and 2 deacons serve the 5 churches, and they, rotate around. But it's that's just one possibility. But that would be something to consider. What's the diaconate going to look like when there's far less priests?
That's a really great segue, because one of the things that this series will be addressing the future of the diaconate in part 3 of this series. So, send me an email or fill out that survey if you would like to get a registration link when that date is set, but it'll be in January or February. So once again, I'm really grateful to each of you on the panelists for talking with us today, and for the SEEP network for creating this opportunity for dialogue. And I'm also grateful to each of you who joined us online and shared in the chat. It was so exciting to see, people from Canada, people from the Church of England, and, people from all over the Episcopal Church. And it was really exciting to hear from everyone. I also would be grateful for the folks who are listening to this later on the recording. And I welcome all of you, if you're not yet members of AED, to consider joining, whether you're a deacon, a layperson, a bishop, or a priest, because we're all called to follow Christ's example of service, and AED exists to equip and encourage you in that work. So if you would like to watch part 1 of this series, which is on the history and theology of the diaconate, I'm posting a link in the chat, and that's saved on SEEP's website. And part 3 will focus on the future of the diaconate, and it'll feature representatives from the Association for Episcopal Deacons and the Fund for the Diaconate. Those 2 organizations work together to advocate for and support deacons. So if you would like, send me an email or fill out the Google form. I hope this webinar has offered some jumping off points for more dialogue on how deacons and diaconal ministry can build bridges between the church and the world. So before we go, then I had asked Bishop Fisher if he would give us a blessing, and then Jack will dismiss us.
Living God, we thank you for the wisdom that's been shared in this hour. We thank you for all these diaconal hearts. We thank you for people dedicated to service, dedicated to following you in your mission of mercy, compassion, and hope. May God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.